Hello, old friends. This is Mike Dawson, and I welcome you to the Silent Pianist podcast, where I interview curious people that do extraordinary things. My guest today is musician, singer-songwriter, and absolutely beautiful human being, Lisa Markley. I want to tell everybody that Thursday, August 17th at 8 p.m., Lisa is performing with her husband, Bruce Balmer, at the Kessler Theater. This concert is a farewell of sorts because Bruce and Lisa are heading to Woodstock, New York in the next few months to start a whole new chapter in what is already a full and beautiful musical life. Now it's time to listen to Lisa Markley talk to me about all things music and a little bit of everything else. It was what it was. I was trying, and I just know, and I'll show you this video really cool at the end after we're done with this. It's about the guy that built the record factory in Detroit, Jack White. Oh. And they found 8 working lathes, and then they built a studio all analog, so you can go in there and cut the record directly onto the acetate, and they'll make it for you right now. And they found one of the 40s vending machines where you could go in there like the old arcade things, and you could go in there and watch it and or perform it, and then 10 minutes later, you've got it, and then they'll manufacture it for you. So they're all set up only for vinyl. Wow. And it's really cool. I'll show you this it's about a half an hour video, but I'll send you a link and you can watch it at your leisure. So this thing is all working, and, Mr. Engineer that I am, so I'll try not to be anal and looking at the stupid screen. So welcome to the Silent Pianist, Lisa.
Thank you for inviting me.
And, I've been a secret admirer of yours for such a long time because we have a lot in common. We're performers, we're educators. We kind of go on our beaten path, that's untrodden.
Yeah, it does feel untrodden. Wow, yes.
And
for better, for worse.
Well, the thing is I think that's the way the education world is. We try to... I think when we're most effective, we try to do things that are a little unique, and it's all about personal example. So it's playing too, it's not just play from the music and then I'll make a comment and let the student figure that out, but, and then we'll get to that, but the thing that I'm really interested in is the kinds of, I guess, I'm always interested in people's origins, what made them the professional that they are now. And, origin stories are always fascinating to me. Like for me, it was always like, growing up in Motor City and seeing Ray Charles at 7 years old and never recovering from that. White kid in Detroit, and Motown was still there, and listening to CKLW radio, which is an AM station in Canada, and they would play all the rock music. It's just awesome. So your origin story is an unknown to me. So where was you born?
I was born in Bellingham, Washington.
So that's near Seattle, right?
Yeah, well, Bellingham is right on the border south of Vancouver, BC. So I was born up near Canada, raised in Mount Vernon, which is about 60 miles due north of Seattle, up I-5. And went through high school there. We were a small town, AA school, 1 high school, 6 elementary schools, 1 middle school. And so... there wasn't a huge orchestra program. There was a very small one, but there was a big band program. So in 5th grade, I signed on for trombone, and I played trombone all through high school. And I was introduced to jazz, I guess, in junior high. That's when they did the first Dixieland piece that I learned to play. But I mean, long before that, like fourth grade, before I even picked up the trombone, my dad had been playing me Glenn Miller and Tommy Dorsey and stuff.
So a lot of music in your home. What's your dad's name?
On a stereo. My dad?
Yeah, what's your dad's name?
William Markley. Yeah, Swine Markley.
Yeah. So what's his ancestry? What's your ancestry? Family?
Markley is pretty much British. Yeah.
Okay.
And pretty much from all four sets of grandparents, it's British, a little bit of Scotch-Irish.
Yeah.
Nothing fancy, just white bread all the way. And my dad was not a musician. My mother...
But a music lover, clearly.
He loved to listen, yeah. And he's still with me today. He's 82. He just turned 82.
Fantastic.
Yes. My mom was the musician, though. I have her voice. She had an incredible ear. She played upright bass in the orchestra and sang in a sextet in high school, the inside alto harmony, and so she was the one, and she played piano.
Was she your first inspiration, maybe? Or at least a role model for music?
It's a complicated relationship.
Well, sure, it always is, but it's like I said.
I would always beg her to not sing. I would ask her to quit singing around the house. I was embarrassed by her.
Oh, wow, that's
she was
fascinating.
so wackadoodle. She'd be like jumping in front of the television set and singing, "Everybody loves."
And your friends would be around.
Yeah, and I'm just like, "Oh my God, Mom, no!"
No.
And the whole world loves a weirdo. Everyone's in a rut. Because everyone loves a nut, and she, when my grandfather died, the piano came to our house that my mom had, and all the old sheet music. I'm just a square in the social circle. Who put that fly in my soup? So I mean, all that, got the St. Louis blues. I learned all that stuff I taught myself to read music when I was like second, third grade. Mom sort of plopped the John Thompson book in front of me. And she said, those are the notes. The
Mighty Red Book.
Yeah. And she's like, those are the notes. Go ahead. And I just taught myself.
I still use that book.
That is still my favorite book when I'm teaching piano, at least teaching little fingers to play. And then I kind of move on to other stuff.
Yeah, you got to keep it diverse. But, there's something to be said about the ones using the materials that we use. So what was your mom's name?
Janet.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. And, so mom's the musician, dad was just a music lover, clearly.
Yeah, he was an appreciator of music. Yeah.
And so what are some of the early concerts you remember, that you might have gone to see? I mean, I already told you My Cat Out of the Bag, Ray Charles at 7.
Well, before the concerts, I remember just being obsessed with songs. And my dad I remember... I guess it must have been 1969 or maybe it was 67 when, "Hey there, Georgie girl." I remember that being on the radio, and I was probably 4 or 5. My dad would call me into the living room when he knew it was my favorite song. Mm-hmm. "Come here, Georgie girl's on," and then we would go to my grandparents' house, and I would have to reach up to hit the piano keys, and I would be able to. Now I understand that it was kind of a rare thing, but.
We take it for granted.
I remember being able to pick out the entire melody and bridge to the whole song of "Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head." Do, 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 do. And I didn't realize what a big deal it was until I tried to teach children how to play "Mary Had a Little Lamb" and how much trouble they had finding just steps. And I'm like, oh, I was kind of a weird kid, and my parents are just like, "Yeah, get off the piano," because I was driving my brothers crazy. The first live concert, honestly, would have been me playing in a band concert.
Okay, so it was performing.
Yeah, and as far as attending, my dad would always buy these season tickets. By the time I was in junior high, he would buy season tickets to the Fifth Avenue Theater in Seattle. And that was a big deal to drive the 60 miles to Seattle to go see an off-Broadway show. And I think a chorus line. I know we went to a dinner theater and saw Tea House of the August Moon. I was probably in late elementary, early middle school. All the musicals, and of course I grew up on all the musicals. And
was that a first love, maybe, the musicals?
Yeah, I guess it was. It really was, yeah. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And West Side Story to this day just slays me. Yeah, I'm still going, "No, Tony, don't go out there. It's a trap." Sobbing,
exactly.
And so that's really, and so I became a huge Bernstein fan.
Just nuts. I've recently rewatched all of those the Harvard lectures.
Oh, yeah. Well, and even just that little 5 minutes he does where he talks you through the circle of fifths and just
the
how
overtone
everything.
series.
Yeah.
I wish I would have had that training when that was the one that needed to be taught to me in my composition class.
It did. It really did. He could just sum things up. And I think my favorite thing is I've gotten these adult students that just want to learn about music. And I had this one student that came to me for about 6 months. He was a gentleman that's about 70 that just kind of wanted to learn to play piano. And really, he just wanted to learn about music. And he would just hit me with a question when he got in the door. And it would take 45 minutes to go through it all. But it was so much fun to just kind of say, well, here's the best way to sum this up. And, and let's talk about the modes, and how the Greeks figured that out. Let me pick up my guitar and show you what happens when you split the string in half. Let me pick up my trombone and show you the overtone series through first position. It's like it all is one and the same. And
sure.
So that's my favorite thing and so that Bernstein 5 minutes, it's like, oh, he's good. So that's that. And I guess to come back to concerts, the most amazing concert I think that sticks to me from this day is, my parents would always take me to whatever I asked to see. Mm-hmm. And so in 1983, right before I transferred down to NT, I begged, and Mom got us tickets to see Count Basie Band. And then Sarah Vaughan was the second set, and she would sing with the Count Basie Band. And so this is 1983, shortly before the Count died. And they literally had flown in from Tokyo, and so Seattle's kind of that stop after Tokyo.
Right.
And I had been playing Count Basie Sammy Nestico charts basically all through high school. So I was obsessed with Count Basie at that point and still playing my horn. And so to see him, at that point he's on a scooter and he scooted out to the piano. He stood up, they pulled the scooter out, put the piano bench under him, and he'd direct the band. He would count them off and go, do-do-do, the little thing he'd do on the piano, but it was pretty mild, pretty low-key. And after one set with just him and the band, he wheels off and Sarah comes on. And she's like, what city are we in?
Right.
And she did her whole thing, and that was like the summer before I transferred down to North Texas.
That sounds very formative to see Basie.
Yeah, and Sarah Vaughan together, because Sarah Vaughan really was, I'd been singing secretly, even though I was a horn player and copping all the trombone solos off the Chicago albums and stuff, I really was singing in my bedroom, and Sarah Vaughan was the main one that I was singing with.
So I sense that you're kind of like a Van Cliburn fan in the sense that he pushed when he was alive, the sense of the tradition of singing, no matter what your instrument is, because it gives you that sense of lyricism and breath.
Yeah, and that's
stuff like that.
Well, when I heard the one interview with him, and I've searched for it online, and it was through KERA that I heard him talking about it, but I've not been able to find. I found other quotes by him that sort of encircle that same thing. But his mother was his first teacher.
Yeah, and
she wouldn't let him play until he could sing it, and that stayed with him, and the attachment of breath to this other instrument, the piano, the guitar. That's a powerful thing that players that don't sing, they miss that. It's really easy to be all about the digits and to become like this machine. And I'm really glad that even though I taught myself piano and was playing two-handed pieces, by the time I got to my fifth grade band and stuff, I didn't take formal piano lessons till high school. And so by then I'd been playing my trombone and I had a sense of breath. And so my teacher would give me the Bach, but he also gave me Chopin, which I just loved. And to become aware of Van Cliburn later and see that,
it was the first cassette I ever had was that Tchaikovsky. That was the winner of that. The thing about musicians like that make you aware that even though their instrument is this one particular thing, it always comes back to the vocal. It goes back to the vocal. Yeah. And so when you started singing full on and you realized that was really your voice, so to speak, what were those experiences like when you're first starting to figure that out? Were you just Was it a natural thing, or were you having to be very formal about it so that you could play guitar and sing, or was it just like in a choir? How did that kind of happen?
Oh gosh. Well, first off, I'm a strange child. I'm an anxiety kind of spectrum child. That's what I was, and I was.
Well, welcome to the club.
Debilitatingly shy, and I think a lot of musicians are. It's really funny.
Yeah, we have the look at me disease though a little bit.
Oh yeah, eye contact, forget it. And it was really easy to hide behind my trombone, and so I would only sing in my room, but in the end, the desire to be making that sound, the desire to be surrounded by that sound in voice, pushed me gradually through all the paranoia and all the fears, and to where I was able to sing in front of people.
Right.
And it was really the desire to sing a song. And I'm hypercritical. So by the time I was willing to sing in front of people, I would only do it if the sound that came out of my mouth was the sound that I was imagining and desiring in my head. And that was my focus. And that's always been my focus.
Was this also a self-taught kind of a process, or did you have some training?
I was in choir, but at that point in high school, our choir director was our band director, and he's a trumpet player, and he didn't sing.
Was that the nature because it was a small school?
Yeah, okay. And actually the year I graduated, our elementary school band director had retired, and so my high school band director, the year after I graduated from high school, went and took over all the band program for the district, and they did bring in a vocalist to teach choirs. And so they broke up the position differently. But when I came up, he was a band director. And I remember, I always had an ear. I could hear, and I could, trombone helped that to evolve, because trombone, and it really is more like voice than any of the other instruments. You've got the fretlessness like the violin, the viola, the upright bass, the cello, but you've also got the attachment to breath. And so you've got the breathing stuff, and you've got the soft palate being lifted and everything that you need to do in tone production on the trombone. But you have to hear that note ahead of time before you go for it, because you've only got 7 positions, or like trumpets, 7 fingering combinations. And if you don't imagine that pitch in your head, you go to buzz your lips, and there's one of 5 different notes you might be popping out of that mouthpiece. So you have to hear it in a way that a saxophone player can kind of fudge and get away with. If their digits are all in the right place, some version of that note's going to come out. But brass is a little dicier that way. And so I had a kind of a freaky ear, and I would always be, I could hear the inner harmony. So like I'd go to church, and I'd always be very quietly singing the inside harmony on the hymns.
I'm always taking the tenor part.
Yeah, always, And I was doing that, and so I knew I wanted to major in music, so I needed to get over my fear of singing in front of people. So
at that time, even before you went to university and conservatory studies, you already had a real clear idea what you wanted to do.
I knew by junior high, I was like, I want to be a professional trombone player. That was crazy, but that was, I just knew it. And
Lisa Watrous.
Yeah, I was a huge Bill Watrous fan, And I eventually, by the time I got to North Texas, I really, at that point, well, by my junior year of high school, I began kind of singing with friends, and I became more obsessed with song, and so even though I was playing a ton of big band and listening to Doris Day and all the kind of cheesy white bread singers, I was also listening to Sarah Vaughan and Billie Holiday and Ella and everybody. But I was also listening to Simon and Garfunkel, and Paul Simon became just a huge influence. So I picked up guitar my senior year and began singing for myself. And then I would always be challenging myself. So I joined choir, I guess my junior or senior year, and I would be the one that would hear all the harmonies. I'd sang second alto, and I could hear the harmonies, but I was too shy to project. And so all the other vocalists that were not shy about projecting but couldn't hear it, they'd sit around me and they'd grab my note and then they'd belt it out. But I was just so riddled with shyness that, that was kind of where I was. Softly, as in the morning sunrise, the light of love comes stealing into a newborn day. Flaming with with all the glow of sunrise. A burning kiss is sealing a vow that all betray. For the passions that thrill love, lift you high to heaven, are the passions that kill love and let you fall to hell. So in each story softly, as in the evening sunset, the light that gave you glory will take it all away. Softly as in the morning sunrise, the light of love comes stealing into a newborn day. Oh, flaming with all the glow of sunrise, a burning kiss is sealing a vow that all betray. For the passions that thrill love, lift you high to heaven, are the passions that kill love and let you fall to hell. So when each starry softly, as in the evening sunset, the light that gave you glory will take it all away.
You know, probably one of the most important times in anybody's musical growth is that time where you're intensely immersed in 24/7 music, you know, and you don't even realize how fortunate you are until you're gone.
You don't. I didn't appreciate it in undergrad. I definitely appreciate it when I returned for grad school as a grown up, you know, but
when I
wasted it.
When I heard of UNT, I was at a small school in New Mexico, and it was like hearing of Emerald City, and I would hear these 1 o'clock band, you know, the lab band's records.
Oh, yeah.
And I would listen to that and I said, this is a college band? What the hell's going on here, you know?
Insanely good. Yeah, they're killer.
And so, you know, I studied with Dan Hurley, and Ed Soph was one of the guys I met at one of the Jamie Abersol things years and years ago, and he told me too many notes and, you know, things like that. You know, he was just, of course, that's the way he was. You know,
no mercy.
No, that's okay, you know, because you need that. But
you do.
So, you know, what was maybe a couple of funny stories you remember about UNT that would, you know, that you can say on air?
Well, I when I was there in '84, I transferred down, so I was a junior, and I decided I didn't.
And this was before. Where were you before?
My freshman year, I was in Whitworth College in Spokane, but I decided I wanted to go to North Texas.
Gotcha.
But I transferred back, and I did Seattle my sophomore year in a community college to sort of kick out some general requirements. And I found this amazing music program at Shoreline Community College, and I was able to sing jazz and play in the jazz band. Mm-hmm. And they had 3 vocal jazz groups at this little community college.
Wow.
And so it was, they had an octet, and they may have had a quartet and an octet, and then kind of a 16-piece vocal group. And so I got to do a lot of singing and playing. And at that point, I was burning out on the trombone, and I'd already applied to North Texas. I was accepted. I thought I wanted to do jazz studies, but I was listening to a lot of Bernstein and a lot of Copland and Prokofiev, kind of just this, there's this one era of music that I just really dug. And I thought, well, maybe I want to be a conductor, but I was too shy, you know. And but I knew that I was kind of burning out on the big band form. So I began putting down my horn. And so by the time I transferred to North Texas in '84, I really didn't want to play trombone anymore, but I already had 2 years invested. And so I got down here, and I was writing songs and composing little snippets. My music theory teacher at Shoreline Community College, she got her PhD at Eastman School of Music. She went to school with Dr. Malman, who was the comp instructor at North Texas, head of the comp department, and she was best friends with Dr. Malman's wife. So Gloria Swisher was a huge influence on me. And she would, throughout our music theory course, have us compose little 8-measure snippets for every new technique she taught us. And so she was kind of my first introduction to meeting somebody who was a composer in real life. She would take the summer off to do nothing but compose, and she was a killer pianist. And so I decided when I got there to become a composition major, and they let me slip in as a junior and sort of bypass the freshman and sophomore courses. And so I wound up being a composition major, which meant I didn't have to play as much trombone. And so that lifted that burden. But I still wanted to play jazz. And so I auditioned, and I got into reading band, which was the best, because I panic in the auditions, right? Which is beautiful. It was the best thing that ever happened to me, because Jack Peterson was directing reading band. And so I don't know that it's funny, except that Jack Peterson is a joy. Jack Peterson is a brilliant teacher. And the reason I have the reading chops I have is because I had the luxury of being in reading band with Jack Peterson as the instructor. It just changed my life. You know, and he was so lovely. There were like 2 trombone players at the school. Well, 3 counting. There was Lee, I forget her last name, who would play bass trombone in the 2 and the 1 o'clock. She kind of bounced back and forth because they always make you re-audition every semester. And then there was me. I was playing like in the reading band eventually, and then 9 and the 8 o'clock. And then the other trombonist, Jan Kagaris, was on the classical side of things. So there were 3 women playing trombone there at this point. And I was in reading band, and Jack would always sing, "Liza, Liza, the skies are blue," whenever he would see me. And so he was just really wonderful. And then he was just a genius in how he taught us to read. It was just, I kick myself for not hanging on to my spiral notebook of rhythms that he ran us through. It was brilliant.
Yeah. I'm very guilty of keeping everything. I'm a high-functioning hoarder with all my books and things like that. It's books and records. You know,
yeah.
I mean, you can't keep it all, though. You know, the thing that you know, this is a perfect segue to the kind of get into our education life a little bit. So it sounds like those instructors, they were heavy influences for probably a million reasons.
Yeah.
You know, like you say, somebody brings joy into a very, what can often be a very intimidating situation, because you're asked to read, and you're gonna fail, and you're gonna fail,
and you need to, and learning that failing is part of that process, feeling safe in it, and yes, there's those
a safe
are the teachers,
space,
a safe space, definitely. Jack Peterson, Steve Wiest, who was so cool.
That dude is just off the charts, man.
He is just so awesome. And he was directing the 9 o'clock as a grad student when I was there. And so he was already gone. He's already been past the Ferguson thing when he was playing with him, right? Yeah, it was because I remember seeing him when Ferguson came and played the year before, and Steve was playing and touring with him.
Got it.
And then Steve came the next year and was a grad student, and I got the luxury of being in his band for a short time. And another person that is just, it's not that he doesn't expect the best of you, because he will.
Right. Very high standards.
But there's a technique of pulling it out of you that involves humor and happiness. No, not like hunky-dory joy, but wickedly funny. And then when I came back, when he went to do grad school and he's there directing the jazz department, there was a heart and soul to the jazz department that I didn't sense in the 80s, that definitely during his tenure of being the head of the department.
So he transformed it into something.
I believe he did. And
I wonder what people would say now of the school.
Oh, you know, I think it's forever changed, because, you know, of course, you know, people retire and more people come through.
Right.
And
evolution.
And what the other really cool thing when I was there, yeah, Brad Laley was a student. Shelley Carroll was a student. I can't remember, you know, we all wound up kind of in the lower bands in the beginning, but of course they were monster musicians and I wasn't, so they shot up to the 2 and the 1 o'clock like within a semester. But Brad and Shelley were inseparable, so they were just like best friends, and you saw them together all the time. So I'm really mixed up as to who was in what band when, because I almost never saw them apart.
Right. That's very funny.
Yeah.
Like
and
musical
Brad's,
Siamese twins.
yeah. Well, when you find someone you click with musically
Chemistry.
and as a friend, and so I think of those two together, and I admired them so much, and they were always very kind to me, and so now Brad's up there doing what he does, heading up the whole, I guess, the saxophones department in the jazz studies. And of course, now their composition department has opened up to where the jazz arranging side of the degree has a composition element to it that it did not have when I was there in 84. I know that there were definitely people that were doing the jazz arranging thing that would go to the classical side to take composition lessons with Cindy McTee and folks like that, where I was studying with Cindy. But you had to do it outside your degree plan to do it. And now with DeRosa there, the jazz composition side of things, so it's no longer just arranging. It's really, the whole department is.
So you're not just doing David Bayer books and doing stuff like that.
And they opened up, the other option was, I looked at voice in the 80s, and you could only do a classical voice degree in the 80s. And they sent, I did choir and jazz singers in the 80s, and they sent me for lessons, and I had one classical voice lesson, and I was like, no.
Right.
I dropped it. I was just like,
insane.
This is not the route I want to go. And so now you can get a PhD in jazz voice. It's really amazing.
And this brings up a real interesting thought that I had as I was preparing for this, was just the fact that we're talking about jazz and rock in a university setting is almost weird to me, because, I learned rock in honky tonks and in clubs, and jazz, as we all know, you look at the Kansas City vibe that was going on, and those particular, that was their universities, those African American performers, and it was such a, those people that were trying to get into the Basie band or getting into, what was later the Ellington groups and stuff like that. There was such an intense university of informality, but I think that those learning environments were just as intense as anything you would see at a Juilliard or an Eastman,
and often more appropriate, I think, to the style. And
I completely agree.
I think as soon as it enters academics, there is a really great element of learning to read, but that's a double-edged sword too. Certainly when you come up with the techniques of how to teach improv, there are some really great tools, and it's certainly unlocked a lot for me. But at the same time, it really depends on the school and on the teachers and on the students. And some students are able to transcend. They're able to absorb all the academics and then transcend and become themselves as a musician. And of course,
they have their uniqueness.
They do. And maybe you don't hear it at 22, but by the time they live a little and they hit 30, that's where they are. And I really feel strongly, especially, that there is an element of what we teach in academics and jazz that the classical side of school, they're missing. And there was a grad student that wrote to me a couple of years ago when I was back doing the vocal jazz studies there, and she was writing to folks that she knew on the jazz side of things, wanting to know why we were doing so much better in ear training and in sight singing, and all that stuff that we have to go through on the classical side of the program to pass your piano barrier and pass your sight singing barrier. And I was like, you come over here and you take Improv 1 and Improv 2 and you try to get out of those without having developed your ear. It's impossible. If you go through those, you're going to have a great ear. And the way they're teaching it on the classical side, they're dropping the ball. They are not really approaching it from the right side. I feel really strongly about it. And I feel like the new classical music, to me, is jazz. And
it's the American classical music.
Yes, and it demands the chops and technique of classical definitely, especially to protect from injury and dexterity and flexibility. But it develops your inner ear and your brain and your ability to improvise. And it pulls it out. And to me, you become the ultimate musician, And if you look at Herbie Hancock or Oscar Peterson or Keith Jarrett or any one of the really great jazzers that you can see, you can hear that they've got Chick Corea, this incredible classical technique, and they've managed to come out of their classical training and not be stilted. But to me, so many musicians come out of a strictly classical background and they're completely hobbled, and especially if they're taught not to play music until they read.
Right.
And, and this is nothing new. If you look at the Kodai and the Orff methods, that speech is first. This is a language. And, we enter kindergarten with a pretty strong command of our language. We can form complete sentences. Nobody's telling us this is a subject and this is a verb. We just speak and we get it.
Right.
We're just and so then they begin to introduce you to, now here it is if we wanted to write this. But you could already speak a bazillion words and communicate your thoughts. And yet in music, we stick them in front of piano and we say, you can't touch these keys unless you read it off that page. What kind of speaker would we be if we weren't allowed to speak until we got to kindergarten?
You wouldn't get past the first sentence.
Yeah, and if you weren't allowed to speak anything that wasn't already on the page, see, spot, run. And yet that's what we expect in all of the piano method books. And I just, it's my soapbox.
It's a common complaint that I hear is just simply this disconnect between reality and the dogmas of certain things.
Yeah.
When I was studying undergraduate, especially in my piano lessons, I would jam with my teacher.
Oh, yeah.
And he would say, you're the only guy that does this, because there was no really jazz part of it there. And I said, well, I don't know how else to do it. I'm not a great reader, but I know how to feel it and how to play it. And, I learned all that rock stuff, just by listening to the records. And I know it served me well, but I knew that I wanted to be the full musician, and so that's what the university kind of did for me. So I'm in complete agreement. So, this is fantastic. I'm really learning a lot.
The very thought of you makes my heart sing like an April breeze on the wings of spring, and you appear in all your splendor, my one and only love. The shadows fall and spread their mystic charms in the hush of night while you're in my arms. I feel your lips so warm and tender, my one and only love. The touch of your hand is like heaven, heaven that I've never known. The blush on your cheek whenever I speak tells me that you are my own. You fill my eager heart with such desire. Every kiss you bring sets my soul on fire. I give myself in sweet surrender.
thing that I notice is the fact that, you really pay attention to melody, but it's also like you really have a good sensibility of emotion for each song. You seem to take a lot of care in trying to communicate the story or the emotion that I keep coming back to that. I don't know how to describe it any other way. You really know how to communicate your lyric. Is that something that was that just simply by learning tons of tunes like the Simon and Garfunkel stuff or Joni Mitchell or all those great performers and songwriters, singers? Is there somebody in particular that you emulate or try to model by, or maybe when you were younger? Maybe it's you're paying attention to yourself so much now, but maybe when you were younger.
Yeah. Well, definitely. I would say, I was definitely listening to all the really crappy pop music of the day, and it was
I have 1,000
80s,
records of crappy pop music.
But when I found Paul Simon, that was the first time I became aware of teaching myself. I got the book of Paul Simon complete, and that was the reason I learned guitar. I staggered through that entire book, and of course internalized every one of those albums by listening to them also. But I learned every single song in Paul Simon complete and struggled my way through bar chords and stuff. But that's the first time I became aware of going, oh, why do I like this song? What's about, I know, I like it because he did this with the lyric right here. I became really aware of what was, to me, good writing. And thank heavens I became aware of that by studying Paul Simon, and not...
That's a master class in writing.
Knack, It was, I was listening to a ton of Gershwin, although, I don't necessarily agree with Ira Gershwin lyrically now as far as things needing to be an exact rhyme. What Paul Simon would do, number one, Paul Simon delved into all these different musical genres and used the finest musicians. And he wasn't afraid to write a 2-minute song or a 1-minute song that had just sort of a through-composed sensibility to it. And yet he would turn around and write more of a standard pop song, so he's absolutely brilliant. And then I guess I've begun writing songs in high school. I will confess, in junior high, I was a card-carrying member of the Barry Manilow fan club.
Oh, well, that's okay.
So I'm just in full disclosure. But so my first songs in high school probably sounded, a lot like Barry Manilow.
Sure.
Until, thank God, I discovered Paul Simon. And then I let somebody hear some of my songs in 1983, and she said, you sound like you would like Joni Mitchell. And I went, oh, cool. I think I've heard Yellow Taxi on the radio.
Yeah.
Where should I start? And she said, get Court and Spark.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad that's what she told me, not to go back to the folk stuff, but to start, bam, right there. And she was playing a jazz band with me. She was a piano player in the Shoreline Community College jazz band I was in. So I was transferring to NT, and I bought Court and Spark on vinyl. And it stayed on my turntable for a full semester. I drove my roommate insane.
Mine was Mingus.
Yeah.
And I just because I was completely clueless.
Oh.
To me, great female vocals at that time was Renaissance.
Oh yeah. Well, and I just love how, she was a real natural piano player, but, when she tells the story of her piano teacher smacking her with a ruler when she'd leave the written page. And so she just said, and I've tried to transcribe what she's doing on the piano. She's got her, she can't tell you where beat one is. She can't tell you what chord she's playing. But she's got a sensibility, and only the jazzers could figure out how to sit in on that. And then she had a real conversational style of lyric, which is what I was naturally gravitating towards. And so when I heard her on that album, I went, oh my gosh, somebody who thinks harmonically and rhythmically in their phrasing the way I do. It's
like listening to art song in a lot of ways.
Yes.
I think that's what what attracted me about her music making. No matter what level or what period, we're kind of looking at Beethoven had 3 periods in his life.
She definitely has a lot of
there's
very precise.
Yeah, you can really hear the
periods.
different. But I think that's what's fascinating about artists like that, and it strikes me a little bit in what you do. You like to kind of go off into these areas of exploration, And maybe that's why you have such a diverse discography, is because you like to explore different things. Do you think you'll ever do like a full instrumental compositional album someday? Is it something you've been playing with? Because that's one of my bucket lists is to see if I can still wave the baton and do that.
I'm definitely open to the idea. I'm really excited that I'm going to be up in the land of Carla Bley, which just freaks me out.
My goodness.
I would hope to run into her in the organic grocery store in Woodstock. I don't know.
Oh, I think it'll happen. You just said it, so it's going to happen.
I'm just going to visualize it. When I finished my composition degree, I was so full bore into songwriting on the side. I just said, I'm through with this. And I was pretty disgusted with what composers were expected to be doing in the 80s. They were forcing us to do all this computer music, dealing with the synclavier, and it didn't move me. It felt heartless. It felt cold. Thank God I wasn't studying composition in the 50s when you had to do 12-tone. It's bad enough I had to do it as an exercise, But my heart really lies with, Bernstein and Bartók and Prokofiev. I love the Eastern Europeans and their sense of syncopation and their ability to take these folk melodies, so they're really good melodies that Joe Schmo could sing, but then they turn them on their ear and reharmonize them. Bartók is the king of that, and Stravinsky. And so these are the composers, and then of course Aaron Copland. As far as the Americans, a little bit of Rochberg. I think George Rochberg, although. He really kind of ran the extreme between tonal and atonal, and he went a little more tonal than I would like.
And even Copland, he came from an atonal kind of perspective early on, and then he started doing, all this great Appalachian Spring and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I was completely unaware that he had. In his very beginnings, we're coming back to Bernstein, because they were hanging out together.
Oh yeah.
And you're just, how did you meet him? Well, because he kind of learned the transcriptions and all this stuff. But, the thing about, Bernstein and Copland hanging out together just makes me happy in the universe. I'm not sure what that is. That just blows my mind. Well, we could have a whole other podcast on Bernstein, and we might do that someday.
Oh, you should. Candide is my favorite of his little pieces outside of Broadway, and of course Broadway, since Sondheim is no longer with us, I feel like Broadway has really changed, and I'm not too keen on what they're doing now because it's been so popular.
So you're not a Hamilton fan?
Well, Hamilton is like, maybe I'm still reeling from the fact it was Disneyfied for so long. I think Hamilton is going to break us away from the whole Disney factor.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. It's curious. It's a curious evolution, But I think when the corporations kind of swoop in and it's all about the dollars and
it's butts and seats,
Lion King and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But when I was going to New York and seeing stuff, I was just going to plays a lot back then. Because I was kind of done with with a lot of the new things that were coming up for Tonys and stuff like that. I wasn't really digging it. I keep going back to those things of the 50s and the 40s,
and that's maybe we just all long to have what we had in our youth.
Oh,
and this
sure,
is just the story of generations.
We're all,
you kids, get off of my yard. It's just like
exactly. So there's we're going to wrap this up here in a little bit, but
I could talk for hours.
This is
wonderful.
You're
a very wise person to.
The thing that I was because I keep coming back to in my mind is why I invited you here today as my first guest. It was to give you the opportunity to, share this wealth of insight and wisdom as a musician and an educator. And I went to your website, and I see this thing from Mr. SLAVENS here, and he says, Lisa Markley has more depth, control, and beauty to her voice in a live concert setting than most vocalists get in the studio. Driving that voice is a soul of wit and intelligence and a heart of gold. So you've made music with Paul for years. You probably went to school together.
We met. We both arrived in Denton in '84, and we worked at Mama's Pizza together. And
so, what did that make you feel when he gave you that testimonial?
I have been.
Did it blow your mind?
I'm like baby sister, and I have been sort of like one of the 10 Hands groupies back when they were the Gone Men. We would go after
I saw them at the
Mama's
Caravan of
Pizza.
Dreams. That's how long ago I saw them.
Yeah, we would close Mama's Pizza up and go out to this shack in Aubrey that he was renting with friends. That scorpions are going through the shack. There's no plumbing, and it's just the guys were going out and using the field for the outhouse, and it was just like really roughing it. And we'd play music all night long, and he's writing all these pop tunes, but he was working on his master's in theory at that point. And he always encouraged me as I would bring in these songs to him. And so I've been following him around and so influenced by him for so long. And when he said that about me, because I had no idea what he thought.
Yeah, what do you do with that? Especially
just,
somebody that's with that kind of history.
Yeah, I take it to heart because I've been, baby sister ogling and following him and admiring him for so long. And, he's very patient with me, and he's been a huge influence in a lot of my. Both he and Bruce, my husband, have this sense of stride. It's not retro, but it really kind of is, and a sense of stride. Left hand, boom, chick, whether it's on the piano or the guitar, and then this kind of funky wit to their lyrics. And I love to write tunes like that, and they've been a big influence to me in that range. And of course, Paul has just got such a range of how he writes instrumentally. And when he went back and did some more studying and composition later, I was really envious. And I've begun writing horn charts where I'm writing fills and stuff to go with my songs. And I am open to the idea of returning to writing string pieces and stuff that I was doing in the 80s.
It's all a natural process, and
Yeah.
when it's right, it feels right. I have just a couple more thoughts, and we've touched on our educational life, you and I, but I'm one of these cats that never taught in the public schools or even like a private school. I was always a freelancer, and even when I was working day jobs, I was always teaching, and it keeps me grounded,
Yes,
and it keeps me honest, and nothing like a 10-year-old girl calling you out on your stuff.
It's true, because they will say what they think.
That's right.
But, they say teach once, twice taught. And I became the musician I am from 20 years of teaching. Holding it down in a classroom affected me as a performer and got me out of my shell a little more. And then the one-on-one just made me listen better. I learned how to break things down better. I became much more self-aware of my own head games. How can I require this of my student if I'm not going to do it myself?
Right. It's a force of personal example.
Yes.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
And so teaching, to me, it saved my life. It just pulled me out of my shell. And when I first began entertaining the thought of teaching, my father's a teacher, and
what did he teach?
6th grade. By the time I was growing up, in our hometown, that was the top of the elementary school. So they pull in the military. This is back when you could spank the kids, and he had a paddle with holes in it. And he would break it over people's butts every year.
Right.
And the boys would hit junior high, and they would make him a new paddle with holes, and send it to him. And so I always wanted to teach, but I didn't think that I was strong enough. But the desire to do it overcame that. And when I first was sitting in elementary schools doing observation, I was still so shy, and I was put in a practice room with these 7th grade trombone players, and I was just supposed to count them through some exercises. I was too shy to raise my arms and count them off. 1, 2, 3, 4. To get through conducting class in college just about killed me. It was just too much. I would go into panic attack mode. And somewhere along the line, once you get tossed into the classroom, it's sink or swim. You got no time to be paying attention to yourself and how anxious you are. You have to address stuff that's going on right there. And so doing that changed how I was on stage. And so teaching. And then, and all the discipline aside, which is the whole classroom thing. That's the only thing I really despise is the dance of discipline we do.
Yeah. I never had to experience that because I would always have to give the kid back after 30 minutes and it's back in mommy's arms.
Yeah, well, when
that.
they're one-on-one, there's not so much pack mentality. And some of my worst kids in the classroom are a joy one-on-one. They're spunky, they're hilarious. And you have to quell all this genius wit in order to manage a class of kids.
Right.
And,
but
there's nothing like hearing a group of kids sing a song at you that they love. It will change your life. And so to me, to have raised, and now I've had over 1,000 students between my classroom gigs and my private students. And
it's a lot of love.
It is. And to
blood, sweat, and tears.
Have them find me on Facebook and tell me how much songs still move them. I'm like, okay, my life has not been wasted. Eddie likes to roll 'em, Eddie likes to stash 'em, Eddie likes to toss 'em, as the tails he wins 'em. Modern penny still wrapped up in copper, jingle like timber copper, solid rings like money. Eddie likes to pinch 'em, he doesn't spend 'em, he keeps saving. Put 'em in the bank and they just keep right on adding, multiplying exponentially. Penny on the track, stretch as far as you can. Taking goes down, making going up. Hustling gigs in the city, I may dues. I'll never think for a minute about the possibility of getting a hippie and a mortgage on Long Island. But keeping the heat on shoes on the kids, be keeping the food on the table. Maybe in a good month he puts away for rainy days. 100 in a dollar, dollar in a pocket, penny in a loafer, good but nothing loafers. Shooting dice up on Penny Lane, or was it trading garbage down on Wall Street? Pimps, popes and Ponzi's, bang on a patsy, call on the prophet. Picking through some pockets, pennies from pensions, never mention Jesus in the temple. And the money changers, they just keep shouting about markets and wars, commies in the union, getting off on someone else's dime, do no time. A little base with Rooney, skimming pennies, lining pocket, shaking fingers, and wagging dogs and keeping up their assets. And leaving Eddie, picking lucky pennies, lucky if you pay him forward. Set aside the wheat bags and rolling all the rest for rainy days.
By all accounts, you've impacted so many people. And you know, as you kind of think about, you know, taking your teaching practice to another part of the world.
Yeah.
Are you going to take a break? You know, are you going to kind of keep your hand in, or is it going to be, you know, writing some scores and getting the quill pen out and putting the black ink on the paper again?
What a beautiful thought. Yeah, you know, I definitely, it's going to take time to establish a private practice in a brand new place.
It took me a long time.
And, you know, it's Woodstock. How many music teachers do they need? They've already got plenty of really phenomenal musicians and teachers up there.
Well, maybe you'll study with somebody. You never know.
Oh, that will probably be my first step. Bruce is really encouraging me to do as much gigging as possible. The reality of needing to earn money is there, and I will probably look at a couple music stores in Kingston and see if they will take on a teacher. I might return to teaching trombone or something. But I'm reluctant to get tied in with a music store and
yes, for all the reasons we've all been through that before.
Yeah, and I at this point I'm 53. I've got my opinions. I teach my own curriculum. I'm creating my own curriculum. It's a combination of song and chord theory and improv along with Bach, and I have my own ideas about it, and so I don't know that I'm ready to surrender to anybody else's agenda anymore, but I got to eat, so
right.
We'll
but
see.
You know, I think you can create your perfect situation because you have some very strong convictions about how you conduct your teaching world. And so I would say you should just stick with your dream a little bit, because it's going to find its way into reality for you.
Thank you. That gives me hope.
Well, no, it's absolutely, you know, I mean, I know that when I walked away from the day job and I said, okay, you know, it's going to be gigging, but it's also going to be teaching, because you just gotta make that paycheck and make those bills every month. And the thing that I noticed was when I was doing a lot of the freelancing and creating curriculum kind of on the fly, and then you kind of develop a process and you see what works and you fail and you get a little bit better hang of it. It sounds like you could write your own book about how you teach.
It's definitely dancing around in my head.
Could be a memoir of some kind.
You know, and
could be the Ms. Markley and Me memoir.
Please.
Yeah, well, you know, we'll look forward to seeing that film on the interwebs.
Oh yeah, I'm sure it'll pop up eventually.
No, tell me about Sherry. I mean,
so Sherry
what's the
Vance,
story with her?
Oh, you know, she's my sister in the arts. She is my age, and we met when I returned to North Texas to do grad school, and so I was gigging a lot up in Denton, and she came out to one of the gigs. She was friends with the venue owner, and they said, "Oh, you have to meet Sherry," you know, and we clicked right away, and I just gave her a bunch of my CDs. And then she called me up, and she was obsessed with this one song of mine, Eve Takes the Fall. And she was really looking for a feminist angle. And she loves to do music videos. That's her first love. And so she's like, you got any more feminist songs? And I'm like, not really. You know, not that I'm not a feminist, but that just hasn't been.
You're not there out in the marches.
Yeah, not everything needs to be a song.
But I could see you marching and wearing your knitted hats.
Yes, and I definitely do. And so she's like, would you be my thesis? And she's working on her master's in film. And so here we are both in grad school.
What do you do with that?
And I'm like, my first instinct is, oh my God, no.
Yeah.
And which means the answer is yes. If it scares the crap out of you, you say yes. And that was, I said, anything outside of your comfort zone, that's where you need to be. That's where the good stuff is.
So that's your mantra.
Yeah, it really is.
That's what your tombstone will read.
It has to, because I've lived my life as anxiety child. So my job is to get out of your head and just, you know, to get out there. And so Sherry followed me with a camera for years. And in the end, the film morphed. I mean, you know, probably 1/20th of all the hours of footage she has as she decided what the film was going to be. And so the music video still exists as being made, and it's almost like a little documentary on the making of the music video. And then I was like, Sherry, you can't not be in this film yourself. Because at this point we developed such a friendship, and I'm horrible when she's got the camera in my face. I'm looking at her and talking to her. You know, I would try to be spontaneous and pretend there was no camera, but in the end, she became such a part of my life, and we became part of each other's lives that it made sense that this was really about both of our journeys into who we are creatively and who we are as women in our 50s, because we don't see ourselves on stage. You know, we don't see ourselves in the world, not except in our friends, but, you know, not in media, and how that needs to change. And
do you think that's part of what this movie is about?
I think so, in some way. I really do. I mean, it's very much a journal pick, just the same way that, you know, songwriting can be confessional sometimes, and so it's about our journeys. But the bigger thing was that we don't see women and women of a particular age, postmenopausal, into their hot flashes, embracing gray hair, you know, out there doing their thing. And yet I'm a better singer now than I've ever been. I'm a better writer now than I've ever been. And
you're hitting your stride.
I'm just getting it together, you know, compared to what I was doing in my 20s. I'm like, I really wish I had more time, because we physically, of course, like the voice is changing. I've been through thyroid cancer. I'm lucky to have a voice. And then the aging voice. And, you know, we're not like athletes where we get 10 years and we're done.
And you're out, right.
You know, but there is a change in the voice that happens, and a real proactive maintenance that we have to do to maintain our instrument for the next 20 years. You know, whether I'm doing guitar or piano, which in the end, voice is what I spend most of my time on. And what I feel strongest at as a musician, is voice and writing. Guitar and piano are merely tools to deliver the music that needs to get out there.
So, maybe in kind of conclusion here today, this has been just such a joy to have you here today. And I can't imagine having a guest that would just encapsulate my vision of what this conversation will be with others. Over the next few months, I'm going to be having filmmakers and scientists from NASA, people that have explored Antarctica. It's going to be just nuts.
This is amazing. And it's the silent piano. The piano hasn't made a sound yet.
I know. I haven't played a lick, which is probably everybody's very grateful of this. So, the thing I want to ask you in kind of closing is you got this fantastic gig coming up at the Kessler Theater.
Yeah.
And there's this venue that we have come to love because it's all about the music there.
Yeah.
So tell me about these guys that run this place and what it means to you to be a part of that world.
Oh, it's really amazing. They're literally a mile down the street from my house. And I've been teaching in Oak Cliff since '94. So I've been driving past this vacant theater for decades.
Wondering what's going on.
What's going to happen, and for all of the negative that we have with gentrification happening, the renaissance of Oak Cliff has made me very happy to see. I don't necessarily like a lot of the apartments going up right now, but things like what's happened with the Kessler. And when they first opened it up, Jeffrey's vision, Jeff Lyles, as they did the renovation, of grabbing musicians in and filming them as part of resurrecting the Kessler in the midst of this construction site. And just, go in there, it's 100 degrees in August acoustically, and just play a song while he videos. And people, I'm sure, in the neighborhood were just wondering, what the heck?
Right.
And it's really been amazing to see this happen. And then the first year, they definitely pulled in all the locals. And at first they would put us in the front room, and eventually they let us do the big room. But as locals, we don't draw. We don't put the butts in seats that it takes to really get things going. But as the second year went in, and they got the Storyteller series going, and they're bringing in Jimmy Webb and Guy Clark, and it's this intimate venue that, standing room only, if you really cram them in, might hit 400, like when Edie Brickell and the New Bohemians play or something.
Right.
It's a hard venue size to make viable. It's beautiful to experience as an audience member.
It's a listening
room, and it's very intimate, and it's intimate in a beautiful way. But with only seating for what they can do, folks can't make as much money, and so to say, we're not going to worry about that. We're going to make it work. And every year it's gotten bigger and bigger. The folks coming through to play, when Ricky Lee Jones sold out those 2 shows. I mean, and their heart is in the neighborhood. And now, of course, they are just thriving. They're doing great, and they don't need the locals. They're really wonderful to let us open every once in a while.
But they truly support the local scene.
They do, and they believe.
Well, I should say
listening.
Texas scene. It's not even really local.
Yeah,
all things are local in this case. But
and it's at this point we haven't gotten to play because we just aren't big enough. And so when I approached Jeff and said, I'm leaving, and I would just like to do one last show with the full band. Once a year, I try to do a show with a full jazz band and traditional instrumentation, but I pull in a couple of horn players. So it costs me a little more, but it's worth it, because then I get to pull out my arranging chops and really write some arrangements. And he said, yeah, let's see what we can do. And so
of course he was going to do it anyway.
Oh, he is just so kind to let us do this. And Damon Clark is going to split the night with me.
How about that?
I'm just like in awe. I'm like, well, there's no way I'm going on after Damon, because he is like nobody you have ever heard. He is just the most phenomenal vocalist, speaking of just blending classical to jazz in a way that works. And is completely unique and completely his own. And it's so rare that you hear a musician that is so completely themselves and brilliant, and so I'm really honored to be doing this, and because it's my going away party that I'm throwing for myself, we're going to split the band. We've got Julie Bonk on piano.
Oh, she's monstrous. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and Drew Phelps, my old buddy from North Texas, on bass. At this point, it's all old North Texas pals. Chris McGuire on woodwinds, Tony Baker on trombone. He's very graciously agreed to come down and do this gig, and Andrew Griffith on drums, and he is my drum soulmate. You know, I like to have gigs with Andrew, and I get to sit next to the drums, and he's throwing kicks in there. He hears every breath that I'm doing and plays with me like no drummer ever has. And so I'm thrilled to get to do this show. And then the band will stay on, and they will be Damon's band also. And then I'll get to just sit back and enjoy a really great show.
Good.
And so it's on Thursday, August 17th. The show will start at 8:30, and I'm the first set on at 8:30.
Well, this podcast will be live in time for promoting that a little bit.
Oh, yay. And we'll be doing a silent auction because Bruce and I are trying to raise the money for the moving van.
Oh, boy.
And so
Everybody please come and buy something at
there's
the
just a
auction.
couple things. The dress that I wore on my very first solo CD from Goddess of Groove, it's this red bouffant 1950s dress. So we've got it on silent auction.
Fantastic.
And the big upright grand from the One Word album cover, that's on silent auction. And then the Velvet Divan, and we'll be singing my song, The Velvet Divan, devoted to our lovely, uncomfortable couch. And those will be the 3 items on silent auction. So come out, please.
Come out to the Kessler and hear all this great music. And then we'll all travel to New York and come see you at one of your gigs.
Oh, that would be awesome.
Well, thank you so very much. This has been just a wonderful privilege and a joy to have you here today.
It is my great privilege.
All right. Wow. Lisa Markley delivers the goods for my debut podcast episode, The Silent Pianist. Don't forget to come out to the Kessler Theater in the Bishop Arts District in Dallas's Oak Cliff neighborhood, August 17th at 8 p.m. to hear Lisa Markley and her husband, the great guitarist, singer, songwriter Bruce Balmer, perform their farewell concert before putting down new roots in Woodstock, New York. And please don't forget to visit Lisa's website at lisamarkley.com. My name is Mike Dawson, and I am the Silent Pianist. You can find me at my band website, roarelectra.com, and you can find the Silent Pianist podcast at everywhere podcasts are found. Goodbye, old friends. I am the Silent Pianist. See you next time.